On today's show, we have Ben Hamilton. He's a history teacher turned author that found himself in the middle of the January 6th riot. So we documented it and wrote a book about it. The book is called Sorry Guys, We Stormed the Capitol. This is part of a bigger series of books that he's writing called the Chasing History Project. You can find Ben online at chasinghistoryproject.com. Link in the description. We hope you enjoyed the show. Ben, really appreciate you joining the podcast today, man. You wrote a book called Sorry Guys, We Stormed the Capitol. How the fuck did you find yourself in the middle of that January 6th rally?
I get asked that a lot because the idea of like the Chasing History Project is my goal when I started it is to try and witness history and create primary source historical documents. Like as a history teacher, I stressed that was the most valuable things, like that account of the French Revolution written by that guy who was actually in the mob that day. That's what's really valuable. And so I wanted to make my own things of that. And people sometimes say, like, right off the bat, you decided to go witness history and you just called it. You knew January 6th would happen. So my response is I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. And I didn't know for sure it was that day. I wrote actually a first book about the giant protest thing in Seattle, like the CHOP, they called it when I was there.
Yeah.
The Chaz, it was called earlier. I had a whole book written about that. Like something controversial starts happening on the news. And if the news disagrees on what's happening, if I can flip between different channels and they give me different versions, then that tells me that's what I want to go investigate. And after I had written that book about that, I was in the middle of editing it, and I started noticing these wildly conflicting news reports of what was happening at Trump rallies, at the MAGA rallies. So and the election was very soon. So I had to make this very difficult calculation where I was like, I want to go investigate that next. My intuition's telling me something interesting is happening at those MAGA rallies. Because the official story is so conflicted, I want to cut through and see for myself. That's what I do. And so I stopped editing the other book. It still hasn't come out. Hopefully it's coming out in another few months. And I moved into a van and I drove up and down the East Coast following around Trump rallies, just interviewing people every day. I was like a groupie, like who follows a band around, like the Grateful Dead used to do. I went to almost every event that was within my range. And I just interviewed them at all of them just to see what interesting would happen.
This January 6th rally wasn't your first. Like you didn't go to that one thinking this is when shit's going to hit the fan, and that's why you went. Like you had gone to previous, like to once earlier in the year.
That's correct. I started going before the election even, and I had a vague sense that there was some kind of a pressure building in society to some sort of interesting historical event. I did put myself out there to I bet something interesting is going to happen soon. But my best guess with election night, I was in Washington, D.C. on election night. I thought something really interesting might happen there. And, it was only so-so. I didn't see the big explosion. Instead, what happened is Trump announced that he didn't accept the election results. And so what I had thought would be an ending, just the pressure just kept building and building and building. And it happened to finally break open on January 6th, which is the day that Congress was supposed to officially certify the election results. And so I was interviewing people in the crowd. For me, it was just another day. And then somebody said to me as I was buying a hot dog, "Sorry, guys, we stormed the Capitol." And I was like, what? And I just ran towards the event as soon as I heard it, which obviously when you hear some crazy happening, because that's what I do. Like I drive towards riots. I drive towards this, to try and document it. And so by the end of the day, it was obvious, well, this is the book. This is what people want to hear about. But I had been researching another book already that was just sort of a broader set of interviews conducted at the rallies in general. And that's why I was there.
It's like your modern day Boston Tea Party. You got to be there. So that's pretty freaking awesome.
That's an interesting historical reference. So let's see. So I love the historical comparisons. What do I think of that?
I don't know.
Boston
I don't know why that came to mind as that, but that's kind of what it feels like.
I guess you can only really judge that in hindsight. Like in 30 years, if this turns out to like snowball into a much bigger event the way the Boston Tea Party did, maybe. But you know what? Okay, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no because from every thing I've ever read about the Boston Tea Party, it was very well organized, like efficient to the point where like when they accidentally broke something that hadn't been on their list, they left the guy money to repair that.
Huh.
Like they came in and they got just those shipments. And then it was very disciplined. The Sons of Liberty, Sam Adams group, they were very disciplined. This, I didn't see that level there. That's a theme I've noticed with a lot of the stuff I've witnessed. The Chaz stuff, the same. It's like you kind of want there to be a plan and an organization that like fits the movie script. Whatever part of it, like me, I have a soft spot in my heart for troublemakers. I always do. Like I like the Boston Tea Party. You know, they were a bunch of rebels. They were a bunch of troublemakers. It is a very American quality, I think. So some part of me, I'll get accused of something here, but some part of me is always rooting for the people I'm interviewing, even if other, you know.
Where I come from is like, well, I mean, obviously the Boston Tea Party triggered a lot of stuff that made us who we are today. And these people believed that's what they were doing. Like history may not be, you know, it'll never be the Boston Tea Party, but these people really believed that's what they were doing, you know? So that's kind of where I was going. Not that it will hold the same, you know, in history for us, but I believe these people thought
they had said like over and over again, this is our 1776 or something, right?
Yes. And I want to follow up. I 100% agree with what you're saying that they perceived it that way.
Yeah.
In fact, there's about the midpoint of my book, I want to say chapter 4 is when I'm actually up there on the balcony while people are breaking in around me, mingling. And I get into this conversation with a guy that's kind of like this in the middle of it. You know, there's like, he was saying like, this is our Lexington and Concord, which was the first fight of the American Revolution. And I was saying like, no, actually, this reminds me more of the Women's March to Versailles in the French Revolution or something like that. I got French Revolution vibes out of it because it was so chaotic and unplanned, which the American Revolution was unusual in that the people who started it managed to stay pretty well in control. Usually revolutions spiral out of control and all kinds of weird, crazy shit happens. Comparatively, like the Boston Tea Party wasn't like that. So I remembered in the early French Revolution, there were several incidences, the storming of the Bastille, the Women's March to Versailles, in which like angry crowds of, you know, the unwashed masses just sort of pushed their way into some government building, but didn't really have a clear plan beyond that. And like didn't hurt anyone or didn't hurt many people. And then it would be quiet for like years and people would be like, oh, the French Revolution's over. And then something else like that would jump up. So I'm always thinking of that.
Yes. So you would spend time in Seattle at that whole Chaz.
Yes.
Oh, gotcha. So was that Antifa that took that over, or was that just disgruntled citizens?
All right. So in the course, because of this project, Antifa is a name that comes up repeatedly that I'm always trying to research for myself, because it's one of those great things that is very divided on what the official story is. There's still people who will insist it doesn't exist, right. You know, and that's obviously not true. I was not able to directly interview anyone who would refer to themselves as Antifa. I wasn't able to speak personally, although I tried, with anyone who was willing to label themselves that way.
Gotcha. So I was curious, like, how did the people in Seattle who, you know, took over those city blocks or whatever it was, right? How did they compare, which as I say it out loud, it sounds dumb because, you know, how did they compare to these MAGA fans, you know?
I'm just starting to have that conversation in my mind myself, because that first book about the situation in Seattle, I'm going through the final stages of editing it to finally publish it. In my mind, it feels like this is the second edition because I wrote it a while ago and I'm coming back to it, but it's be the first one out. And I feel like I have this obligation to come up with a good comparison between the two events because there's a lot of surface level similarities. They're major, public disturbances. They're large groups of people. They're politically motivated. There's, very odd mixed reactions by the government with people on either side claiming they were too lenient or too strict. And of course they're from the opposite political parties. So it's a test for me. Can I actually navigate that without my bias getting involved? They're not automatically even, So I feel like the conversation begs to happen. I don't know that I have a full answer yet. I could give you a few of the most obvious things that pop into my mind. The thing in Seattle, it went out for 3 weeks. So I think that's the biggest difference. It had time to fold in on itself and repeat things again and again and get a lot more extreme. They stayed the night and woke up and kept going. And that's very different than what happened on January 6th.
Well, because were they more organized? Because I had this thought after January 6th. I was like, it was what the fuck did all these MAGA people think they were doing? They went and they stormed the Capitol and they're like, we're here. Okay, now what? That was they had nothing else to do. They're like, oh shit, we're fucked. We didn't think it, but there was no other plan.
Let's just take selfies in
that's right. And at least the people in Seattle, they kept it for 3 weeks or whatever,
Yeah. Okay. 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 I agree with all your criticisms of the MAGA people. I spent huge parts of the books on that. What were you thinking? You broke into the building and you didn't have a step 2. You just thought, hey, let's break into the building. That's a good idea. Yeah. That was the whole plan.
Now what? Yeah.
Yeah. And I go into details on that. There's some really weird things people said to me. But the other question you've asked is one I haven't really been asked before. So I want to get into that. And I think there is undeniably an element that it lasted so long because the city let it. The mayor of Seattle, she spoke several times and everyone was talking about her. She's kind of a character in the story. Mm-hmm. And this is, just my read on the situation, having been there, having talked to people. I don't know that I could source articles that this would hold up in court, but my feeling is the mayor was afraid if she cracked down on the protesters, her voters would turn against her because the people were largely on the side of them, at least for the first few weeks. And so it became kind of a bind. I think she was just sort of hoping it would just go away. Here's a particular detail I did notice that I think is important. The city was providing them with porta potties and hand sanitations and trash pickup. It was providing those services to the area. They could have cut that off at any point, and eventually, almost immediately after they did, people went home. But so there was almost this very weird, and the police, they kept being forbidden from using certain things. They were forbidden from using tear gas. They're forbidden from doing that. That didn't seem to tactically make any sense from anyone I talked to. But the mayor just kind of liked being able to stand up and say how progressive she was. And this, I talk too much, but I'll try to get one more point that this reminds me of, and then I'll pause. This reminds me of another crossover between the two events. Because remember, they're very similar in time period, only a few months separated.
Right.
And right before January 6th, the country was still in George Floyd mode. Everyone was all talking about police brutality. That was the popular thing for politicians to be doing. So in both events, there was this weird, I believe, influenced by that political winds. The mayors issued these weird statements limiting the police, I think, because it was politically popular at the time. So the mayor of DC, she issued a public letter, it's sourced in my book, refusing reinforcements from the National Guard the night before the event. She said that they didn't want them. I think she used a term like stormtroopers or something like that, because it was popular at that time to brag about how you were reducing police. And I'm amazed that she didn't get more blame for what happened, because I think that in both events that was a big factor. Is that at first people within the government were sending orders to hold back because that was politically popular at the time.
one of the things in reading your book, I thought about how, like what could the government have done? Like why didn't they stop this storming of the Capitol sooner? And it dawned on me, like, our government doesn't want to seem like they don't want to kill American citizens, right? Like, how bad would that look?
I think they might have changed their mind about it afterwards, but yeah,
Sure.
I think that was the thought the day before.
But I can see, I mean, like, we're okay with flying drones and killing, civilians from some other country all day long, for sure.
As I mentioned in the book, thank goodness there's a magic invisible line that makes it not okay to use drones to kill people inside this country, but okay to do it outside. I'm sure that magical line will hold forever, and we'll never have that problem.
But hopefully, but the optics of, like, the mayor, the governor, or the president ordering to kill Americans, to kill your own citizens, just looks bad. And so but at the same time, what they did in Seattle was crazy, to let it go on for so long. Like, you can't, people run those businesses. Like if the government's going to allow that, then a business pays taxes. Like, I need to be, if I can't go run my business, like, you better call my bank and pay my bills for me, because I'm going out of business because of your decisions. Like, that's not right, and it
right. And what amazes me is that what you just said there is not apparently widely believed. Like, lots of people will continue to vote for a government that is, not protecting their business or whatever. Like, it never occurs to them to vote for someone else. They're just so loyal to their party.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. Like, I think, as a, social studies teacher, I taught several different subjects. My favorite was history, but I also taught U.S. government for a while, As a social studies teacher, that's the contract. That's the social contract. I agree to let the government make me pay taxes, and in exchange, they use those taxes, at least in part, to make sure my neighborhoods are safe to live in. That seems reasonable to me. Yeah. And, like, if they're not doing that, then I should vote for someone else. But that's how not a lot of people see it that way these days. They see it as part of a culture war. Like, the other side's so evil, they have to vote for these people they don't really like just to make sure the other guy doesn't win, and they stop paying attention to the basic services that the government is theoretically supposed to provide.
Like, that's, I think, one of the reasons why I can't pick a side, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a registered independent myself. Like, if I was a Bernie Sanders fan back in the day, and so you have to,
full disclosure, so was I.
Awesome, brother. Yeah, like you said, you were a Democratic Socialist.
Yes.
Towards the end of your book, when you were confronting someone and he was effectively threatening to kill you, I believe, is what he was doing in a roundabout way.
I think he was saying he would get around to it eventually. I don't think he meant he would do it right that moment, which may be an important legal distinction. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's pretty much
sure. Yeah, it's a good point. But it seems as if they want us to pick a side, and it's all about sides, and it's not about topics or what matters. It's like, just what side are you on? It's this tribal environment, and if you're not on my side, then for some reason it's okay for me to just, like, hate you.
Yes, to want to kill you. Yeah. The other, making people into other. Like, all the things I say about me being loving and peace loving, I meant my people, not the other. The others, they don't get love and compassion.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the Civil War, this is compared to the Civil War time where this is breaking families up, and families are literally dividing over which side they're on. It's, I don't remember in my lifetime ever being like this divided, where you're either for us or you're against us. You're our enemy.
I agree. And to be clear, I find that on at least two distinct sides, like a liberal-ish side and a conservative side. And the perfect label may not be something that's available at this moment, but like I haven't never seen it this bad in my life. And that's one of the central premises of the Chasing History Project. I'm like, as a guy who's studied history, who's seen other civilizations collapse, I think we might be collapsing. Like, I think there's a chance we could turn it around, but I'm also like, my mission, as I just decided to document it, because it seems like the kind of time period where that's happening. It's getting bad.
So before Seattle, before January 6th, are these the first things you were chasing, as in chasing history, or was there something else going on before that?
Well, I'll tell you. I am one of those guys who's written a ton of books and it's just got like a stack of them and didn't publish them. So I had always wanted to be an author. I always idolized what I saw as this sort of tradition of the American authors, this particularly like, for me, inspiring set of guys. You got your John Steinbecks, your Jack Kerouacs, your Hunter S. Thompsons, who witnessed the times that they lived in and became part of it and kind of fearlessly threw themselves into it for the sake of creating the story and maybe even the truth. You know, there are these, I read those guys and I felt like that made me understand America and understand American history in a way that history books don't. They made it come to life when they wrote about things. So I always wanted to be one of those guys. That was my dream. I wrote a whole trilogy of books, well over 1,000 pages, that never saw the light of day. That, you know, maybe should I become famous at some point, maybe will be published, like the Lost books. That was just about me hitchhiking across Europe, taking drugs and having sex, though. That it wasn't like the goal wasn't finding history.
Right.
Like the idea of making my love of history and my dream of writing into one thing, that was the big aha moment when I started the Chasing History project.
I mean, in that era, this era that we're in, it's really good timing for you because it's there. This is news. I mean, you're getting on it. You got on it when at the perfect time. I mean, going to a Trump rally, going to Antifa rallies or whatever liberal rallies. That's news. That's history. This is the beginning of the end. That's what I see it as, or that's what a lot of people are seeing it.
It certainly could go very bad. I try to remember to sprinkle in some positive words every now and then because I don't want people to like give up, you know. But let's fight the good fight at least here, people. Come on, don't lay down and die. But yeah, it is definitely a serious time to be alive, no doubt about that.
So with the Chasing History project, like this is, do you have a series of books you have planned for this? Like you have this book about January 6th. Mm-hmm. Obviously you previous to that was the idea of chasing history with what was going on in Seattle. Was that part of that kind of group of books in your head already?
I kind of, and I was just writing like a new introductory chapter that I think afterwards I decided I didn't like that much and I might not ever use. Except maybe here. Is you can see me think of the idea as I'm writing the book. Like I had this vague idea that, oh shit, I always wanted to be an author. I've never actually published any of my books. I always somehow got off track in the middle of editing. Maybe I'll write a book about this, you know, and that's just kind of it. And as it went, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if I phrased this as if it was a lesson plan for my history class? You know, like halfway through, I think of that. And so it's almost like a prequel. It's kind of becoming formed in the midst of it.
So, going back to January 6th, when you show up, you're at that rally, you got to wait, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours for Trump to even start speaking, right? When did you know that shit was going to hit the fan?
I don't come off as a particularly brilliant character in that bit of it. I noticed later than some. Like there was one of the chapters. I have this idea actually. I think it's one of the chapters that the joke is that I keep looking for what's the interesting story. You know, like. Because I'm sure my thought process is maybe I'll interview this guy. He's got a lot of flags set up. Those are the flags of South Vietnam. That's kind of interesting. Is this the most, where's the interesting? And like the audience knows that it's actually already started while I'm doing that. I like I said, I didn't actually learn of it until I bought a hot dog. Like there was a hot dog stand that was open, and I'm pretty close. Again, like I try to capture the humor of it, like laugh at myself. So in the chapter, there's a couple of times where like I look over at the Capitol lawn because like I'm across the street. Hey, there's some people standing all the way up on the balcony. I didn't think people were allowed up there. That's weird. Oh, look, a hot dog stand, but eventually, like I'm biting the hot dog and a woman says, sorry, guys, we stormed the Capitol. And she's so nonchalant. But like, so I interview her, like, what did you say? And she starts telling me that, yeah, people broke into the building. And so then I run up to the building. When I arrive, people have already broken in, but I do see more people continuing to rush in. It is still ongoing when I got there. So I wasn't too late. I got some of the good interviews. And then I'm interview people as they leave. And I'm like, what were you thinking? Which I think is a very valuable historical question.
Right.
People often ask, I did not enter the building. I came right up to the edge of it. There was like it was like a bathtub. Like somebody pulls the plug and like the water just starts circling the drain. Like suddenly all the people were like water and they're just getting sucked in to like this broken window. People just rushing in all of a sudden. And so I'm getting swept up in the crowd. And I thought about it. I'm like, well, this will make a great chapter in the book, like this would be, maybe I should do it. Like, and at the last minute, like without even really any conscious mind, something's like, nope, bad idea. And I jumped out of the way.
Do you regret that decision?
I think about it all the time. Part of me obviously does as a writer, but the truth is, because I mean, I've been doing dangerous shit all my life, like one of my the unpublished books, there's this moment where like there's this like crazy guy pounding on my car, screaming unintelligently, and like I think, where am I going to have to kill him? Like and I've been in not a lot, but in more than most, a few dangerous situations. And like, I just had this calculation where I was like, this is the line. Like, if you do this, the government will hunt you down. Like you will regret it. Your life will not, you can't undo that.
Have you been contacted by the FBI to ask your side of the story if you're there as a neutral person? I mean, that's, I'm assuming, I know there were some journalists that were involved in some investigations and stuff.
There may well come a day when that happens. I'm not really a big enough deal at this point, I think, for them to have cared about that enough, but eventually it could come up. But yes, that is the argument that one always makes, that, journalism is fundamentally important. Like it has this, you can't make history unless somebody's there to record what happened. You can never know the truth if you live in a government that just cracks down on the ability of journalists to observe dangerous events, and there's always been a tension between that. I do think the journalists are not doing so well in that regard these days. I think there's a few people left who have almost really more functioning on like a code of honor than any sort of actual government or business policy, who are holding the line, trying to be real journalists. But I think a lot of them are like, oh, government doesn't want me to cover this. Okay, I'll leave. And it's getting a little scary. It is, but this is the hill I decided to die on. So,
I always it's funny. I was talking to Chris about this last weekend even. Mm-hmm. It seems as if, all of these right-wing people complain about mainstream media and how they're not doing their job. And then I was like, well, what the fuck is mainstream media today? Is it ABC, CNN, Fox? Somehow Fox isn't thrown into that group because they're on their side 9 times out of 10, it seems like. But it's like, I don't get any of my news from mainstream media. I don't think anybody watches mainstream media, at least in any amount that like makes any sense, right? Like Joe Rogan has way more viewers and listeners than CNN does. You could probably collectively put 5 of CNN shows together, and that might equal one of Joe Rogan's. But they're all the same listeners. But it's like no one cares about mainstream media. So it's like, why is that even an argument? Where do they get?
I'm going to ring the superlative alarm here. I'm going to ring the superlative alarm. You were using a lot of superlatives, so that would be no one, everyone, all,
of
never,
course, sure.
Words like that. That's. And I think, aside from just being the form, generally should try to avoid those things because they're so easy to disprove.
But then my points don't hold any weight, so I have to use those.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about all the people I know that watch CNN.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, I know a lot of people who watch news.
All right.
But
I
think actually there's actually a larger number of people in that audience than you are implying. I think they're large enough to make a difference. I don't think they're a majority anymore, but they think they are. That's what makes it so interesting. There's like a block of people who trust CNN or MSNBC or Fox because, they're not really that different or whatever, that collectively you can glob that together and they create some sort of like official story. And there are people left who believe the official story enough that the government can base its claim of legitimacy on them, and so I come up this a lot because there's a lot of things that people slip into the official story that are provably false, but nobody puts in the energy. And they're so used to being told, hey, don't listen to other sources, that when you can prove something's false, they don't listen. Like example I always give, and this is due to the excellent journalism of Glenn Greenwald. I have no affiliation with him. I've never met him in my life, but I respect the hell out of him. And I cited his articles in a section of my book. I used it as a source that proved that there were a lot of news reports about a police officer getting beaten over the head with a fire extinguisher, falling into a coma, and then dying the next day. And it was completely a lie. I mean, a guy died, but he died of a stroke. He wasn't killed by a protester. Nobody broke into the people who broke into that building, for better or for worse, did not kill a single person. Now, obviously, that it's still a crime breaking into the Capitol building. Like, I can't believe I need to say that, but I guess I do. That's illegal. Those people are criminals. I'm not on their side. I want them to all be punished for what they did. But it is inaccurate to say they killed people. That's a lie. But the media repeated it, even after it had been repeatedly proven that, the coroner investigation showed that there'd never been a blow to the head. There was like another round of news stories saying, well, maybe it was a allergic reaction to pepper spray. They're desperately trying to make it the story that they'd killed somebody. And then finally the story came out saying that wasn't true, but they had like months of pumping that out, the official story.
And people like me, I've never heard the rest of that stories. I went on thinking that someone was killed there. So that's news to me.
I conducted an interview with a guy on like the radio, and I mentioned this and we talked about it, and I mentioned it in my book, and then he sent me an article about that. Like, he sent the article I put in the book and he said, wait, this guy died. Like, he didn't realize it was the same one. So there's a lot of people getting back to your point, who do believe the official story. And that's, I think, what people are complaining about when they complain about mainstream news. And I'm with them on a lot of that. It's just, as you pointed out, a lot of people make that exception for that one news that tells them what they want to hear. And they shouldn't do that. But there are problems with the official story.
Yeah. Like, I could see if it's, maybe something like the Associated Press, right? Which a lot of those stories are, they appear to be rewritten. And then, they're going to show up on some small, city news website and almost as if they wrote it themselves, but it is almost word for word. It came from the Associated Press. And so
there's some great compilations of that, like on YouTube, where they show all the people. Yeah.
Where they're just saying the same exact words on different local news channels across the country. Just exact same words.
Oh, this is, I think, another important thing to understand about our time period and about the collapse that we're potentially in. I think enough people have called bullshit on the official story from what we were talking about like that, that it's a significant portion of the population, but they don't know what to do next. Like, this is what I tried to do, is like, because as a history teacher, like I'm uniquely suited to answer this question, is a lot of what you do in history is look at different sources and try to decide which one's more trustworthy, and try to, parse out which parts might be useful in one, which parts might be useful in the other. But see, that's a difficult process. There is no one source people can just go to and say, like, here's the truth, here's all of it. Learning the truth, pursuing the truth is a skill, and it takes effort. But people don't want to do that. So a lot of people will be like, oh my God, I can't trust Fox News anymore. I'll just trust this
Facebook.
Random guy on the internet or Alex Jones or Q, the mysterious Q that shows up all over my interviews with people.
Well, I think that's one of the things is there's too much information out there, whether it's false or not. And then if people are not listening to Fox or CNN, they're reading their feeds on Facebook and social media, which is even more bullshit 99% of the time. It's hard. It's hard to find the truth out there.
Right, and that's like what I had, these conversations with high school students. It was like, look, if somebody's telling you that it's easy to find the truth, they're probably manipulating you. It's probably a trick. I'm sorry, it's not easy to find the truth.
It's easy to find the truth.
Do the work.
It's easy to find the truth that you're looking for. You know what I mean? Like, so if know, you're like I have right-wing family and left-wing family, and they can go right to sites where they could have all the facts that back up what they're saying, but they're going off of it's not legit stuff. You know what I mean?
They're just spitting out talking points, really, right? Like that's all it is, and there's no substance behind it.
I do want to circle back and repeat something though that I think bears mentioning, because it's really easy to just it's easy to complain. But I will say that the people who don't trust the news, they're right. They're right not to trust the news. There's the people who say, so I was talking to the MAGA people, and this is not widely understood, I think, because the official story didn't say it, but they believed the election had been stolen. They thought there was cheating, and they'd been robbed by, dirty election officials. And that was what they were mad about. And I don't blame them for not trusting CNN when CNN says, no, trust us, the election was fair, because I don't trust CNN.
Right.
I've caught CNN lying. They're not, so I get how they got to that point. The problem is people don't understand the difference between proven, disproven, and unproven. Most of life lives in that middle area. You don't have enough evidence for sure to say it's true. You don't have enough evidence for sure to say it's not. And so you got to keep that in your head. A lot of people, once they say, oh, I can't trust CNN, then they're like, well, that must mean that I can trust Donald Trump when he said the election was stolen. And you just kind of step back and apply your logical reasoning skills. God help us. That's the only thing that could save us if more people did that. I don't blame them for not trusting CNN. All I blame them for is for leaping to the conclusion that the opposite of what CNN said must be true. They should have just held back.
Well, so, you mentioned Q, which is obviously a reference to QAnon, right?
The people I spoke to, very similar to Antifa, would insist that that's just a term made up by the media. Now, that's bullshit. I've seen people use it, but at a certain point, they decided all have collective amnesia. And they say, no, QAnon, what's that? I know this guy named Q. I like Q, but QAnon, you all made that up. That's not real.
Sure.
That's the line I got.
But then it, and as I say it out loud, it's just my news sources, which I don't vet 100% of the time, obviously. I just take it as fact. And, I'm all three of us are probably guilty of that, and everyone everywhere is guilty of that. But I would think that those people who believe Q, they're just jumping to this conclusion, right? That whatever this random guy on 4chan is saying is fact, and oh yeah, that makes sense. That's why blah blah whatever. It's just let's go storm the Capitol. Crazy.
Yes, but it's a large enough group that I think it bears study. It's the same idea I keep getting to is there's these people who they can see that they're surrounded by bullshit. They can see that what the politicians and the news are telling them is bullshit. They've had it with that, and they don't really know how to process that. Their school system has let them down, as schools have been wont to do, and nobody taught the fundamental lessons I always taught about reasoning, the actual method, the scientific method, or the methods that historians use, because you often don't have enough control to actually perform scientific experiments. That's why history is valuable, because you got to do the best with what you've got. And parsing information gradually to find if it's trustworthy. And people don't have this process. So they get off the bus of the mainstream, which I did as well. And then they just leap into the next thing. And so the people who just have the most charisma, the most entertainment value. It's kind of, it's somewhere between like a religion and like a TV show. They take advantage of the internet economy, which is an economy of attention. So all you have to do is get people's attention. You get some clicks and you make money. And so the people who've had it with the bullshit in the mainstream news, they naturally get pulled into this economy that exists. And I don't think most of them really understand that the person is making money just because they're clicking on them. And so they just say, well, why would they lie? And, people like to feel special. They like to feel like they know something everyone else doesn't know. I certainly fall victim of that, and a lot of factors come together, and I feel like I get it. I feel like I don't feel like I hate these people. I don't even necessarily feel like I hold them in lower regard than like the fans of Rachel Maddow. To be honest, I feel like it's somewhat similar. They're just trusting different untrustworthy leaders. Having said that, again, it also looks a lot like the French Revolution to me. Like people stirring up angry crowds with the potential to destabilize the government. This is not a harmless phenomenon.
I want to take it back to January 6th if we could.
Sure.
While I was reading the book, I must have had to pinch myself a few times, almost like to remember. I was like, whoa, this isn't someone just writing an article who wasn't really there. Like you were there, dude. You were at the rally. You saw people up on the second level of the Capitol building, whatever. And then you're like, what's going on over here? Like, let's go check it out. And then you're just documenting the shit out of it, man. So when you left, at some point you started climbing up, right? Like you found it, you never entered, as you said, but you found yourself on the grounds and you're surrounded by people. Like what was going on, man?
Well, I'd say the single most exciting moment of it was I walked up the stairs. So I'm on the balcony. I often got as close as I could see in the windows, and people were emerging, and I would interview them So I was right there on the balcony. But so having gone up to the second level now, it overlooks a drop, and so at the very end, as the police reinforcements finally arrived, they started tear gassing the crowd and shoving them back. It looked like for a second I might get pushed over the back of the balcony and fall off. And it was, 20 feet. Like if I landed just wrong, I maybe could have died, So I'm climbing down the side of the wall to escape police tear gas. And I start to fall. And one of the bad guys, he grabbed me. He may have saved my life. I didn't even remember to thank him. I thanked him in the acknowledgments at the end of the book. But yeah, so that was, I was very much in the moment like that because I was pretty much thinking the same thing. I was like, holy shit, I just climbed down the sides of the Capitol building to escape police tear gas, and I can put that in the book, and I certainly did.
So, you had mentioned that in your book that at times it seemed as if there were people that were trying to control the crowd, right? Whether it's hey, we're going to go do this, or no, we're peaceful, we're not doing that. There was some guy breaking windows, and the person you interviewed was adamant that that's not a patriot. And you're like, well, what? Let's define patriot, or whatever. But when you're in it like that, is it just chaos? Is there anyone that's saying you go left, you go right, flank it, go?
Before I do, I just want to mention that's another thing that I makes an interesting comparison between that and the CHOP, which everybody else calls the Chaz, but I arrived near the end when they had changed the name. So that's what I thought of it as. But at both of them, when I got there were people pointing to some people, and they were saying, that doesn't represent what this is about. This isn't really about that. There was this awareness in people there of what they wanted it to be. And then the gap between that and what was actually happening. Both of them had that.
Do you believe there was a plan though, right? There was a plan going into this with a group of people? Because weren't you saying that a lot of people were saying a lot of the same exact things?
Yeah, there's a very interesting answer to that question, depending on how much detail you want to get into.
Give it to us.
because, like, as you were saying earlier, there did not seem to be any clear plan of what to do after they got in the building. Like, I really tried to find someone who knew that plan, and nobody seemed to know it. It's possible no such person existed. On the other hand, there were any number of undeniable signs documented by myself and others that maybe something would happen, even if they didn't have a plan. Like, people showed up wearing hard hats with work gloves. Tons of people had like body armor on. People had like shitty, weird cosplay body armor. There was a lot of things that were like, I could tell. I talked to people. I'm trying to remember if I have any specific quotes on this in the book, but like, people had like a lot of flags mounted on flagpoles that were suspiciously thick. Like, they were really thick. Like, they were obviously clubs, but there was like this plausible deniability that it was a flagpole. And I talked to people who, one guy in particular who had like this thing that, you know, we need to just push our way into the building, you know. And you got to remember, like, I was interviewing people for months. I'd talked to people who were saying a lot of things about a child sex slavery ring in a pizza parlor that I'd actually eaten at. You know, like, I heard a lot of crazy stuff. I thought this was just another crazy thing someone was saying. I'm like, what? People need to push their way into the building. And then like an hour later, they did it. You know? So like, there was some people who had some idea, but what more than one people told me is they said, we need to push our way into the building, and what was it? Relieve Congress of their command. You could look up the exact words in my book, just like the founding fathers did. And of course, being a history teacher, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about?
Like, when did that happen?
Yeah, nothing like that. The American Revolution is an incredibly long and bloody war of attrition, one of the longest in history. You're talking about no shots fired, but like, there was this belief from more than one person in the crowd that somehow, if you pushed your way into the building, that gave you the right to like dissolve the government, you know.
Yeah, you won.
And also that was what the founding fathers had done.
Right.
So like, that was coming from somewhere. And like, I'm not like an internet historian. I met a guy who actually I traveled with. At one point, he was a character in the book and like all his scenes got cut. I felt bad, but he was like a photojournalist. He knew all of the ins and outs of like the QAnon community. He was always explaining stuff he'd researched to them. I'm not the guy to talk to about that. But I get the sense that was going around in the internet on the different forums. Hey, there's this thing that the founding fathers did where if you just push your way into the building, you get everything you want. No one gets hurt. Let's just do that. And like pitching. And so I do think that was an element in what came into play. I also think, and I'll make myself stop in a minute, that people thought they were going to be told the plan when they got there. They were like, Trump invites them and says, come here. And Q, who was very popular at the time, not so popular anymore. I think got too much heat and switched to another name. There's a good documentary about the whole thing. I think Q Down the Rabbit Hole. Again, never met the guy, but it seems a great documentary. And it fits about who he thinks was writing the Q stuff. But so Q tells them, come to Washington. We've got a plan. Trump tells them, come to Washington. We have a plan. And so they were just kind of prepared for anything. They're like, well, let's bring our club. Let's bring our gas mask. Let's bring our body armor, and whatever we're asked to do, we'll be set. I think that was the mentality for a large portion of the people going in.
But there were a few people you interviewed that talked about, and you know, these are guys with, you know, specific patches, like a wolf patch or something. Like
the militia guys. Yes.
Yeah. But, and that, you know, there was one guy who even was like denying that he was a 3%er maybe. But there was like stories of like, hey, just beyond the river, on the Jersey shore. Like, I don't know what side it was. I suck at freaking geography, but like there's people waiting with guns. Like, we just got to make it we have to make it till the morning.
Yeah.
Like, how did these people know that? And
like there was a handful of people that had a plan. Everybody else didn't. It was almost like, you know, the idea of storming Area 51. You know, there people had a good plan.
I think that's a very good comparison. Yes.
But you know, they
just a bunch of
people
crazies
showed up, but you know, they didn't get far.
So I was looking for a particular passage about that, but yeah, okay. So the militia guys, there's. I, in my mind, put the category of the militia people the Proud Boys, who are not technically a militia, and Antifa, which I do think it's fair to use that word because people know what it means. Like there's people like that out there, even if they refuse to call themselves that. There's similar categories. I think there's definitely something there. I think that the different media outlets kind of obsess about them, and it's hard to separate fact from fiction. I had a bit of conversations the day before with some of the militia guys. I have about enough to make another book. Maybe I will. I think I need to start producing new content again soon. I've been coasting off that burst of activity for a while. But I could have written another book about the day before. I did a lot of interviews then. And I met militia guys. And, there was something creepy going on there. I feel comfortable, like most of the people who actually got stiff prison sentences, got like 15 years, were actually convicted of treason as opposed to trespassing, were militia guys. And if I had to guess, I'd say that's probably about fair. Like, I think if anybody did go into that the night before thinking, hey, we're maybe going to overthrow the government, it would be those militia guys. And the main ones present were the Oath Keepers, who are by far the scariest. They are quite well organized. You think they're like real army when you see them. Like, they've got pretty good body armor and things like that. It takes a minute before you realize they're just like a guy who's like happens to have a radio in contact with his other guys. And then the 3%ers, who were kind of pathetic as far as I saw, but they were there. And like both of those they had organizational structures. They were there the night before. Some of them were like hired as bodyguards and like by major like Republican speakers. So there's a trail of, connections that you can trace there. And at least some of them are in prison for treason now. And I'm not an expert on any of them. I got like the business card from the leader of one of them, and he said he'd interview me, but then he wasn't taking calls the next day when I got around to calling him. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on any of those subjects, but I don't find it crazy that they got found guilty of treason. I wouldn't be surprised. I would put them in a different category than the majority of the crowd.
This may be a silly question, but what the most famous guy that was arrested, the guy with the
horns?
Yeah, the QAnon shaman.
So he was, what group is that part? Is he part of, what is he part of? Or is he a standalone, different group than what you just mentioned out of those 3 or 4 you said?
Well, like I had like a brief conversation with him like hours before it happened. So that's one of my, claims to, reflected fame. I wouldn't say it was a full interview though. It was very short. But, I've read a little about him. My take on him is like, he's certainly not a member of any militia that I read about. I don't want to cast myself an expert on that guy. His name's Jacob Chainsley. He's got out of prison. I'd be interested in interviewing him someday. I thought about doing it when he was in prison, but ran out of time. He became the face of the day, and it's interesting how many times he weaved in and out of my story. So what I did do a lot is trying to imagine what it was like to be him that day, like his perspective. And I'd be interested to ask him someday how close I got, because like you start out at the day, you're going to MAGA rallies. You've been doing them a while. You got a costume, going, and you've got a whole sort of persona built around it. And then through some like weird set of circumstances, people break into the building, and not by any clear, like hierarchy. There's not like anybody giving orders. I don't think this is what I'm guessing here. I don't think, but like you got this one guy who's loves being the center of attention. He's got the coolest costume. So he just almost becomes like sort of the de facto leader. Like, what's that like? You wake up a morning, you're a regular guy. And then a few hours later, you're walking into the conquered Capitol building. Like the fucking Senate of the United States has fled in fear of you. Sure. Like walking into like the conquered area, taking these pictures that go viral, be the most famous person in the country, if not the world, for at least a day. And then everyone turned on him. Like even the people at the time, like when it became clear that, we're in trouble for this isn't popular, a lot of people wanted to make him the scapegoat. Like there was all this thing going around that day, going viral because people share what they want to believe. They're like, hey, this guy was at a BLM rally. He's actually BLM. He was a plant. He was an Antifa plant, you know? And so then like all of a sudden everyone hated him. And then he's in prison. Like after a day like that, it's hard to keep your sanity. Like, you know,
that is one of the questions I was just going to ask about the conspiracy theory stuff, because, you know, with the Antifa, Antifa gatherings and the storming the Capitol, you know, there's always been people saying, well, it was a peaceful riot until, you know, some implants, you know, started paying, you know, they strategically stacked bricks in certain positions in front of stores so that they can throw them into windows.
Which, you know, like, which is interesting, again, that both sides say that.
Yeah.
Both sides say we were a peaceful protest. There were some outside agitators instigating violence.
Right.
And again, this still goes back to that core understanding. Like, this is how knowledge works. Make sure you can tell the difference between what is proven, what is disproven, and what is merely unproven. And like they desperately wanted to believe that there were outsiders, the outside agitators. And that doesn't automatically make it false. But they latched onto the QAnon shaman and say, well, it must have been him. And they believed it so fully. And that one you could disprove. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't anyone else there. I would not want to imply that. That's not crazy.
Did you notice anything? I mean, because it would still be unproven. It would still fall in that unproven. But is there any evidence or anything that might be able to sway or push it to a proven or disproven category?
I think about this one a lot. There were definitely a few things I saw that day that made me wonder. I didn't feel like I saw any conclusive proof, but you know, like it's not impossible. Like, I don't want to put myself out in the position where like I'm staking my reputation, you know, saying definitely not. And then 10 years later, because I tried, it's very, very hard to hit this balance to like accurately record everything that's important and accurately decide what's important and what isn't.
And then I'm sure your brain can start making you think you see things or heard things, and you're like, oh man, what, you know, so much is going on. Your brain is overwhelmed with all this stuff that's going on. Right. And now you can almost start questioning like, well, when that guy said this, was he trying to tell me something, or, you know, what is it? You know?
Yeah. So, I mean, a few different things I'll try to throw out and not go into too much detail just so I can get a few down. There were definitely people accusing other people of being plants. Like I can say with 100% certainty that people said that. I wasn't sure I was convinced, but there were, you know, people were saying it. Like
was that during the moment? Like, you know, when they're on the Capitol grounds, are they being like, don't trust that dude, you know?
Yes, there were some. I noticed a change in tone. At the end of the day, people were saying, oh, we were tricked into going in there entirely. By some outside agitators. And during the day, they were like, it's wonderful that we went in, but there's still these outside agitators. So I noticed that shift. But even at the time, like, for example, and you mentioned it, there's a guy breaking windows. Like most of the broken windows were apparently from that one guy, or at least maybe half of them, I think. And like people were shouting at him, stop. And he just kept mechanically breaking the windows. He was like a machine. And I spent some time on this in the book because I'm trying to decide if this is important. Like, I feel like if I ever broke a window, trying to remember if I ever have, I would have been angry. Like, it would have been some kind of passionate thing. And this guy, he just, one window broken. It was just a job. There was something weirdly creepy about it. And so, like, people were saying, no, you're just a plant. You're just trying to make us look bad. Not impossible. Yeah. You know, could have been something like that. On the other hand, like I did, after they pushed everyone out, I did see a guy walking around with like a hangman's noose. You know, and like he just kept repeating the lines, traitors get the rope. Like every time I tried to say anything to him, you know, like I don't think that guy needed like the FBI to make him do that. Like there were some people like that there.
Right.
So getting to the actual truth can be tricky. But like people, there is a popular theory on the internet right now, somewhat backed up by some details in the news. Aren't those always the best ones? That there were undercover FBI agents there, and maybe the FBI agents were actually encouraging the violence as opposed to just being there. I don't know. I can't weigh in on that one. I don't think it's crazy. I can't personally confirm or deny that. Now, in the case of January 6th, I will go out a little bit out of a limb and say my general conclusion after sifting through all the data I was able to get is that, to me, it looks kind of like a broken play in a football game. Like, I don't think there's anyone who actually wanted that to happen. Like, whatever different people were, plotting, whatever, whoever was pushing in one direction or another, I think it was like I called it a perfect storm of intersectional stupidity. I still do stick with that. Like, a lot of people, I think it's an important question. Were there, undercover agitators of some kind in the crowd? And, I first think that my first suspect for that then is the malicious. Like, I would look there, but where what the Trump people really want to be true is for someone they dislike to have done it, so it can be blamed on someone else, and that's not impossible. It's not.
And I feel that's the same thing that the BLM movements turn into. Like, I think people are just shitty, and you get a group of thousands of people. There's definitely shitty people in that thousands of people, whether they're on, they're just there for the party. And then it just takes one or two of them to do something shitty, and then it starts getting contagious. And I think the Trump rally people, they didn't want to be in that same category as BLM, because BLM things always got out of hand, and then now their group's getting out of hand, and they want to blame everybody else except for themselves.
And one of the more fascinating theories that I have been pitched, I can't remember if this made it into either book, but people have said this to me, and that's interestingly not impossible, is that maybe it's the same group. Maybe just like the same groups of people are infiltrating both events just because they like violence. And, maybe they're connected to the government, maybe not, but they did both complain, hey, there's outsiders making us look bad. What if that were true? Isn't that an interesting thought experiment? What if there is just groups of people who just kind of want unrest in the United States? Switching topics a bit, I know that, oh God, I'm connecting too many dots too quickly. But that's something that happens in international politics. That's, Russia does that.
Yeah, I was just going to go into that.
States near Russia, they just want to get propaganda into social media of, whatever, Lithuania, the countries that border Russia, to make them fight each other, to make them easier to absorb. That's fairly well documented. I don't think I get in any trouble of saying that. That pattern kind of applies to a lot of social movements in America. Is there somebody screwing with them, on both of them, on the inside, just trying to make it so that it always spins out of control and nothing gets accomplished anymore. Again, I have no proof at all of that, but I've heard it suggested, and I can't disprove it either. It's worth looking into, I think.
I don't know how much proof is behind it, but I know, just from watching Rogan or whatever, how Russia has put propaganda into our social media and kind of just to start fires in social media, just to create unrest and division. It wouldn't be too far fetched if that's true, that they do have, other countries could be inciting these, divisions, right, even not on social media, but in these crowds as well.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point, it's always important to note, because I have such a specific mission, I'm just pure speculation now. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that when done in controlled environments and you remember what category it's in.
Yeah.
But I try to traffic in writing things that I can actually prove and drawing conclusions on things that I can actually prove. And right now we're sort of brainstorming. I'm kind of outside of the area I have evidence for, but life's messy. You don't always get all the perfect evidence. Sometimes you do have to make your best guess with an incomplete picture.
I would think that this almost goes back to my 9/11 conspiracy theory thoughts that I have sometimes about how, right. It's a whole nother thing sometimes. Yeah. And it sucks because I'm not this conspiracy theory guy. I want to believe the best in people, but if I look at what I feel like our politicians do and our government does to these two tribes, are you left, are you right? And how we argue about that. We've been arguing about the same shit for fucking 40 years. why is abortion still a topic? Why are we still arguing about these things? And somehow, I mean, and I get that maybe abortion might be some fundamental like a pillar that some people want to believe in, or die on that hill.
I can actually answer that if you want. Like it's easy to organize people over things that they're angry about. Anger seems to be the most powerful emotion. Like people share things on social media when they're mad more than any other thing. I believe there's research to back it up.
Dude, 100%. As a software developer, like if I put out an app, it's really hard to get 5 stars. It's super easy to get 1 star, right? I mean, like it's the angry people who complain, and the happy people, like you never hear from them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I also argue, and this is just my own sort of personal philosophy here. I've read a few books if people needed a source where I get these ideas from, but people have more active instincts than they think they do. A lot of the things that we get angry about, we think we're going through a rational process, but really we're just kind of born that way. Like there's certain animals that get mad when certain things happen. So like, I think if you see a young child being hurt, that triggers your anger, which makes that a useful point to organize people around politically, which is why people talk about abortion so much, and also why they talk about like child sex slavery so much, because you get a strong instinct emotional reaction from that, and that's how you build political movements.
Sure. Yeah. Going back to sorry, Chris, you had mentioned before, like this whole clickbait society we're in, right? Like this internet-based society. And it's super easy to mention abortion, to mention, child sex trafficking or whatever, which like those are important things, obviously, but it's like I feel as if, and again, this might be the conspiracy theorist in me, but that's what our government puts out. And then that's what drives clicks. And that's what, all of these media outlets pick up, because this is how they stay alive, is if you're viewing pages, then you're viewing ads. And it's like this, that's what we want to hear about. And it's it's so easy to pump that shit out. And then what doesn't get news coverage is what we're doing in, some South American country or something, about how we're setting something up here, doing whatever. And it just, because that no one gives a shit about that, that's not nearly as exciting.
I wouldn't say maybe not. I mean, it could be government putting it in, but it could just be shitty people that are greedy that know they get paid if they click on something. So,
do you mind if I expand on that? You
do it.
Reminded me of something, which was the Hunter Biden laptop, which I will just absolutely eat crow on that. I must admit that I dismissed it. I thought it was a crazy thing, and I now admit it wasn't. But it fits kind of what you were talking about, because like I remember talking to people who were talking about that basically I guess should I catch people up on the backstory of what the Hunter Biden laptop is?
Yeah, do
it,
man. Yeah.
This is why the official story is so powerful, because it's one of those things that was suppressed. Like people managed to turn it into something like, oh, I've heard vaguely of it, but I don't want to hear about that. And a lot of people accepted that programming. But this is basically what seems to be the case, is that Hunter Biden left his laptop at a repair shop and kind of forgot about it. And the repair shop guy turned it over. Apparently, like people can do their own research, but I believe the way I heard it is it looks like what he did is he sent it to a few other people first, and then he gave it to the FBI. So like there's just this proof of corruption. At least it sounded to me like the major story when I first started taking it seriously is that he was on this, the board of a natural gas company in Ukraine. A lot of news seems to happen in Ukraine. And he has no experience with natural gas. He doesn't speak Ukrainian, but his father was vice president at the time he got that job. And so he got $1 million a year. And that company got a few notable favors from Joe Biden when he was vice president. But those things are, of course, totally unrelated.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So that seemed to be the basic gist of it. And it looked like there were files on there related to his time for that would tie possibly even Joe Biden, but certainly Joe Biden's son, to some sort of crime. And that seemed to be something that the media eventually admitted was real. But first they took it down because they said it was Russian propaganda. And by the time they admitted it was real, the election was over. And
so by they, like you talking about Facebook, Twitter?
Yes, Facebook and Twitter. And then to connect a few more dots here, if you remember the Twitter files story broken by my hero, Matt Taibbi, that related to this because it proved that when Facebook took down that story that could have hurt Joe Biden's reelection chances, they were told to do that by the government. Like the government was directly intervening.
And let's be honest, like this was, what is it, September, October, like just like pre-election. That's when all the, shit comes out about candidates, right? Like they're holding on to that smoking gun and they're like, boom, now we release it just before election.
They call it an
time.
October surprise.
There it is. Yep, for sure.
But so like I was in the position of like interviewing people on like buses full of Trump supporters. And all of them were telling me like, I had this Twitter profile with 50,000 followers yesterday and it all got deleted because I shared a story that was published by a reputable newspaper, like the New York Post. It wasn't even like a random blog and they just shut it down and there was nothing I could do. And like, I got to admit, like they were in the right on that one. Like, at the time it was happening, I had to hear it 3 or 4 different people before I believed this was even a thing, because I was still conditioned. I think of myself as so free, but like I was conditioned to think these people are crazy, but they weren't on this one. This one, they were completely right. But here's what made me think of it when you brought it up. Just as I'm starting to get into it, and I'm almost being like, okay, guys, if this is real, lead with this, like the fact that the media is censoring you here, this, you could pitch it to like an independent type person like me and they might actually care. But that's not what they do. Like the next day I start hearing people saying, Hunter Biden will rape your children. Hunter Biden will rape your children. They're just walking around and like it morphed into a child sex thing, which I think made it, less likely to stick. Like it was to the benefit of the people who were trying to suppress the story that if it was out, oh, look at that. It turned into a child sex thing. Because then people didn't take it as seriously, like strategically, Now, apparently there were like actual, I guess that they just couldn't resist because there were also like actual sex videos on it. So it was like Hunter Biden having sex with someone who was probably a prostitute in like Thailand. But like, they couldn't, for whatever reason, it became a child sex story and that killed it. And like that wouldn't be a bad method. Like if I was secretly running the world and someone got dirt on me, it wouldn't be a terrible way for me to beat that story is to just release an even crazier story. So all the stories sounded crazy. Like,
dude, I go into that with UFOs, with the Epstein stuff, with, there's I think there's a lot of truth out there, but then someone throws out something ridiculous and then it's like, oh, it can't be real because this isn't real. This ridiculous thing isn't real.
Right. And that's what we keep saying. Like, it's tiring to apply that process of logic to every single thing. Like, nobody can do it for everything, but maybe you can get a circle of people you trust. But like, you do have to, because once you've rejected the official story, which I think people should do, then you're like, what now? Do I just believe everything I hear? Like you have to put a lot of things in your head in that unproven category and just sit with them for a long time. And that's difficult to do.
It's hard even to seek out the truth, right? I mean, it's, even for me, like I'm well aware of what I'm being fed, or I at least think I am. But I'm lazy. Whatever is in my Google News feed is what I'm going to read. I'm not a social media guy. Sure, I have a Twitter account that I signed up for, I don't know, in 2011, whatever, but I don't fucking do it, And so it's like, I'm still just like forced fed. Like I'm like a baby bird, just shove it down my throat. I will drink it. I will eat it, and I can't stop because
I will push you there a little bit. Then I will be the teacher who you hate for pushing you a little bit. Like, I think you can do better than that.
Yeah.
I think there is a level of effort we have to ask of everyone, or America is doomed. So, or our civilization will collapse. So, I would say, cut out the Google News, man. Don't trust Google.
Yeah.
Don't let them give you your news.
Well, and that's the thing is, you get in the algorithm, and you start seeing things that you're clicking on. So, it's so hard. There's so many things fighting against it. Yeah,
right. You got to get out of the algorithm. Get like a privacy browser. Like get Brave, like for starters.
There's a browser that I use that's really good.
Firefox is okay. Use a lot of like open source software that doesn't track you.
DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuckGo. They're pretty well. There's a whole community with like that, the privacy community.
See, here's
Honestly,
the thing, though.
That's where you start, I think.
Sure, but so dude, I immediately wrote down this question because it was about a year and a half ago, maybe two. I tried. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to get my news from Google. Right? I'm going through
Substack.
Yeah, Substack. But it's like, and then it's but then I'm like, God, this takes way too long to read. Like, it's 11:30 at night. I'm laying in bed on my phone, like falling asleep. So it's like, how do you find good news? Like, where does it live? Where I want unbiased, which is by itself impossible, I believe, but as unbiased as you can get, man. Just give me the facts.
Well, I mean, I'm sitting right here, man. But,
well, which is why it's so exciting to talk about.
No, that was a joke. Like, I think,
but it's true.
But the best you can ever do, I believe, is disclose your biases. I don't think you'd ever be totally unbiased. But to your larger question, everything is a process. There's no easy answer. I can't magically fix this for you. You got to get used to the idea that it's a process. You try to get a little better at finding the truth every day, and you don't give up and relapse. Like, if you can hold that idea in your head every day, you'll get a little better. And, in 10 years, I'm sure you'll have a great system. Right. I don't want to endorse things too much, but I don't know that much about them, but I have subscription that I have that sends me emails. It's called the 1440 Project. They seem okay. I think a lot of independent journalists are the way to go. Substack is very popular. That's where a lot of people, get there. But I do think it is just important to cut out the stuff that's algorithm driven. Like, just don't let that be getting into your subconscious in the back of your head. Just turn the Google News off on your feed. That by itself is a good step, I think.
Yeah. I feel like Substack is the OnlyFans for journalists.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well,
it's great, but like, everything's $5 a month, and like, if it in 6 weeks, I could be like, why am I spending $125? It's like, well, because I subscribe to all these things, and
yeah.
Which is worth it because I'm like helping, like that actually matters, right? Like, these journalists need that money to survive because they're independent,
It's really scary now. Like, this is an interesting thing. I can't remember where this was first pointed out to me, but it used to be that newspapers made most of their money from classified ads, and then from people purchasing advertising. So as a result of that, they were profitable enterprises. Yes, that's my point. So they were profitable enterprises. They used that money, the Craigslist money, to pay reporters to just spend weeks like researching the government, catching them being corrupt. Like, this is why we have like Watergate. This is why we have like the change the course of American history, because there was a time when reporters got paid from advertising revenue. But nowadays, that's all gone. All the newspapers that are left, and most of them are dead, are desperate for money. The TV shows are the same way. The advertising revenue is gone. They're only making money like directly from the stories. So they have to tell the most bombastic stories. And it's a very different environment. And I think that's a huge contributing factor to a lot of the changes in our culture, actually, that is underlooked. Just the people creating the official story have a very different set of motivations now. Yeah.
That's why the biggest news is what's Kim Kardashian doing, or why did Kanye go onto the
stage? Or Donald Trump.
Or Donald Trump
actually got ratings. Like, he was in many ways the best thing that ever happened to the news industry. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think about this a lot, actually, because all these people on the news, they claim to hate Trump, but every time they go on TV and say, we at CNN hate Trump, it's good for Trump. Like, so is CNN really that dumb? Yeah. Do they really not know that they're helping him by saying they hurt him? Yeah. I actually go back and forth on that question, because they.
Where does this January? Okay, so say Trump wins this next election. So can this January 6th be the Tea Party? I mean, can it end up being something like that? I mean, because once Trump gets in, like he's learned from his last 4 years, or his 4 years. He's gonna really. I mean, he's gonna pardon everybody. He's gonna pardon himself for everything, right? What do you think's going to happen if he wins the next election?
Let me answer this question by telling you that like a model I came up with like years ago, like before Trump was even president. I came up with this idea that we were tracing the history of the late Roman Republic. and this is, many Americans don't know this. They really should teach this in school, and they don't. Like, the late Roman Republic was used sort of as a model in many ways for our republic. Like, it deliberately has the same shape, like even down to like the word Senate. That's not a common word. So like 2,000 years ago, there was this system of government that had a Senate. They had some level of elections, but like it had all these weird checks and balances, so it wasn't quite as democratic as Greece. And they had hundreds of years in which they had, relative stability. And they had, people accused of, fraud and buying their votes. And it was a lot like America. And eventually, the Roman Republic collapsed and it became the Roman Empire. And it was just basically a king. But they had hundreds of years when they didn't have that. So my two favorite historical periods are the last generation, when the Democratic Republic died in Rome, and the first generation, when the Democratic Republic was created in the United States. You can almost see it like as a torch, like the Cicero, the last great defender of the Republic, passed on, and then the founding fathers, who were very great admirers of Cicero, especially John Adams, they took his torch and they tried it again. So I started to being like, oh, wow, it's pretty much the same. I wonder how far I can get this. Like, who do the characters line up with? And like Cicero, I gave that to Barack Obama, actually. This guy who starts out inspiring and you think maybe he's going to save you, and then he sort of lets you down, but you have mixed feelings about it. And so like, who's Julius Caesar? Who's like the guy who broke apart the Republic? That would seem to be Donald Trump. These are like both guys who spend all their time talking about how terrific they are and how they're the most amazing, terrific guy ever. And why won't everyone just admit how terrific they are? And then we could all get along. And they're even like both insecure about their hair. Like they always have this talking about their hair. Like Caesar actually means a fine head of hair. That's what that means, that nickname. And it was just, he was going bald. Like his nickname was nice hair and he didn't have, So like they're these incredibly similar guys. And so I came up with this idea. Okay, well, if that were true, what would happen? Well, and remember, this is before any of this happened. I guess Donald Trump would be elected president once, a very controversial term, and step down, because that's what Julius Caesar did. And then he would run again. And when he gets elected again, some people would refuse to accept the election results, and it would break into two governments and they would fight each other. And Donald Trump would win. And at some point in this process, Donald Trump would be assassinated. And once Donald Trump is assassinated, all hell breaks loose, because all of his followers will never trust the government ever again, and democracy doesn't work anymore. And like I came up with that idea like when I was actually really high at the time, but like I was just like thinking all about history, and I'm like,
that's when the
best
ideas come out.
Yeah, and then like 10 years went by, and it kept coming true. It freaked me out. So if you want to hear like my worst case scenario, like what would actually break the American system of government, I would say that Donald Trump clearly has the support to win the election, but someone gets the bright idea of killing him. Like I think that's the worst case scenario, because then all of his followers will just riot, and you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. Which, to be clear, I don't want.
Same.
No.
But I do think it's amazing, like how many people, like I'll even meet people in my family who just, they would be okay with that.
Yeah.
Like they hate Donald Trump so much. They're like, like even before after he won the election, but before he was sworn in, there was like a legitimate looking group of people who had like backings in the mainstream news saying, let's just have, they called them Hamilton delegates, because the play Hamilton was popular at the time. That supposedly this idea that the Electoral College don't have to vote for the person that the people voted for, which technically, the Constitution is kind of vague on that. But like, are you? That's really a precedent you want to set? Like, what's going to happen the next election after you do that? Like, you think you can just throw out the rules once and have people go back to the way things were after that? That's not how it works.
Hasn't that happened in the past, where the electoral college did not vote for who the majority voted for?
Okay, there have been delegates who symbolically changed their vote, but it never changed the outcome of the election.
Okay.
Now, the closest one might argue would be Andrew Jackson. He had the most delegates, and he didn't win the first time. They gave it to John Quincy Adams instead, but he didn't have enough to win. Like, it was split. There were like 4 different people. And so he felt cheated, but they were like, well, you know, you didn't have enough to win. And so that was the argument.
So nothing recent. Nothing recent. The electoral college has not. Electoral college has not voted against what they are technically supposed to or should have.
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
It's never. They've. And the one that I mentioned, if you want to really get into the weeds, like what happened is, according to the Constitution, what's supposed to happen when there's no clear winner is it went to the House of Representatives, and they didn't give it to Jackson. It wasn't the Electoral College directly not giving it to Jackson in that case. There's never been a case where these guys, the Electoral College, were just sort of middlemen between the voters and the president, just decided, hey, we're just going to pick a totally different president. That, to my knowledge, has never happened.
And that's kind of weird. Like, because I always, like, since I was 18 and able to vote, I kind of always felt that was something they always said is a possibility because it's happened before, kind of thing. Well, it really hasn't happened in any modern history. Yeah, so it's weird that people think that that's going to save them every single election. I feel like that's always a topic kind of thing.
Well, if you want to get into though, nerdy social studies, apocalyptic possibilities though, currently the House of Representatives is controlled by the Republicans. So if, like, for example, a third party candidate were to do unusually well and win a few electoral votes, say, for example, there was the son of this is nephew, but there's like a Kennedy running a third party candidacy who's got to like 20%, who's being totally ignored by the media. Like, wow, that's bias, because he's got a decent chunk. But so you get this guy who splits the vote, who nobody gets enough votes to win the Electoral College. It goes to the House of Representatives. House of Representatives is controlled by Republicans. So they would probably give it to Trump. And so then there'd be a large number of people who could somewhat legitimately claim that, oh, the election was stolen, or this isn't a legitimate election. And so people would have, and then like the worst case scenario is always 2 people declare themselves the winner of the election. And they both have a plausible enough claim that some element of the government backs one and some backs the other. That's how you have a real civil war.
Is that
anything else is just a fantasy?
Is that likely? This Kennedy coming in and wrecking house here? I mean, I listened to the guy be interviewed before, and his voice drives me crazy, so I won't be able to.
Yeah. First of all, I want to make clear that it would be totally unfair to blame him for that.
Right.
No,
I wouldn't say it's his fault.
It's a possible scenario.
Right.
But I haven't decided who I'm going to vote for yet. I may end up voting for him. He, at least of the 3 main ones, he seems possibly the best of those. That may not be saying that much. He said some things I don't like. But I think, because if that did happen, the media narrative would be to blame him. So I want to get out in front of that and say
definitely.
that's...
Yeah, you can't blame somebody just because...
The problem is that the Democrats are running a guy with dementia. Just have an actual primary and get any rational person to run, and you'd have a pretty good chance. But they're running the worst possible person.
Oh, yeah.
And so, if they try to pass their loss off on Bobby Kennedy, I'm just calling bull on that.
I think it's going to be tough because I think there's enough liberals who don't like Biden, and it's going to be scary. That's why I don't know if you've heard.
He's such a bad candidate. It blows my mind.
Well, what do you think about them saying Michelle Obama's going to run?
Okay, yeah. So here's best case scenario for the Democrats. Again, it's all speculation today.
Yeah.
But
that's all right. I like it.
So this is again speculating, imagining if, not even commenting on how likely it is, but if Joe Biden were to drop dead of a heart attack shortly before the election, they might sub in a more popular person at the last minute who was without giving enough time for the Republicans to run against them and run a smear campaign. That's probably the best case scenario for the Democrats at this point.
I thought
because he's a terrible candidate.
I thought there was a scenario where Michelle Obama could she'll throw her hat in the ring at the last minute and then go at it.
I don't want to. I haven't heard this one, and I don't want to definitively say anything's impossible, because the truth is the American Constitution is laughably brief. There's all of this vague areas that we just kind of fill in with tradition that aren't technically laws. And the primary process isn't even run through the government. Those are just like private institutions. Like they change their rules all the time. Blows my mind. Like if you watch, like one thing to watch in primaries is like just this year, honestly. The Democrats have always had New Hampshire, first Iowa and then New Hampshire, first caucus and first primary. And then South Carolina goes third. But Joe Biden was always very popular in South Carolina. So he told them to do South Carolina first this year. Like that actually happened. Like, it's a lot of the stuff in the primaries is just like tradition. And there's no particular law against almost any of the things they do. It's
like precedence was set. So this is how we always do it.
Right. But like they could always change it. The rules committee, could always change it. If they think no one's paying attention, they do. There's especially like if they're screwing over lesser known candidates. I believe it was Lawrence Lessig, if I'm remembering this quite right. There's a guy, he ran for president several times. It was always sort of like a stunt. He always said that like if he did happen to win, he'd only be president for one day and then he'd resign. He just wanted to institute these particular, but he's also like a political nerd. Like he has an exact set of reforms. So he was trying to draw attention to his reforms. Like really, that's what was happening. But like one year he raised like a good $1 million, like, and of course, like, so people were checking like the rules about who gets to go to the debates and he qualified. And so then they changed the rules, so he couldn't qualify anymore. Like that's how they do. Like the rules are not at all set in stone for the primaries. For the primaries, they can do whatever. But to your idea of someone else jumping in at the last minute, if that happens, it means that there's someone running the Democratic Party who is smart. I'm kind of leaning in the direction that they're just really dumb. Like just reading the tea leaves, like it seems like there's a group of people, again, reading the tea leaves. I think there's a group of people surrounding Biden who've calculated that if he goes down, they go down with him. So they can't swap in a different candidate. So they're just making up random excuses to keep him like weekend at Bernie's, like keep his corpse propped up so they can all keep their jobs. That's my best explanation for that is that. So, if what you said happens, that would prove me wrong, and it would prove there's someone who's smart running a long-term strategy.
So if it is how it is, your tea leaves are saying that the Trump will probably win. I'm just curious. This is like saying who's going to win the Super Bowl. So this is not. There's no. You could be wrong, and it's okay. But
no,
who do you think? What are your tea leaves saying?
Okay, let me first of all say that I believe Trump has enough support to plausibly win. Definitely. Like, I will be shocked if it was like not at least close.
Right.
What's actually going to happen? I don't know. Like, that's kind of what I want my next book to be about. I'm not sure. Like, I think there's a lot of crazy shit that's got like a 15% chance of happening. And I'm not sure which one is like most likely. I would really like to get my shit together to the point where I'm just back on the road. I call it going in field, just trying to guess where the riots are going to be on the election. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I do think, let me say this. I think it represents a strain on our democratic republic. I think there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who I'm always hard on because like they used to be my team and I expect more from them. But I think there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who are considering just breaking the rules. Like, oh, if Trump's going to win, we have to stop him by any means necessary. They do it in Brazil. Like there's a lot of other countries where the democratic institutions are not very strong, where people say they'll follow the democratic institutions until it means giving up power. And then they come up with some excuse not to. And I'm very afraid we're reaching that point in the United States. I hope we don't. But that is why I feel the urge to be out there writing books, because I think there's at least some chance that we're getting to that point, that our republic is degrading.
And don't you think that's as damning as, your worst case scenario of Trump being elected and assassinated? I mean,
yes.
Either one can lead to a complete collapse of this three-legged table we're sitting at,
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of scenario. I feel that our republic is old and infirm and is no longer stable. Like democracies don't last that long. Like the fact that you got a few hundred years out of a democratic republic is somewhat unusual. Like it
was a good run.
Yeah. So like people people think it just happens automatically, and it doesn't. Like, having a democratic republic takes effort. There need to be a lot of people maintaining, and God knows I've been trying all my life, but most everyone else doesn't seem to show up anymore. And so I think there's any number of ways it could die within our lifetime. And a lot of people start laughing at me when I say shit like that, but like, I didn't say it would, I just think it could. And I think it's worth maybe putting in a little effort before it's too late. Like, is that too much to ask, guys? Let's pitch in and save America. Yeah. Why not? It's a pretty good country. Why let it die? I mean, that's my little pitch.
Well, Ben, how can people connect with you?
I try to run everything through my brand, which is the Chasing History Project. So I've got a website, chasinghistoryproject.com. I'm on at least some social media, trying to get the word out there. You can follow me. I don't use the social media that much, but I may soon. I've got a podcast that we're just starting to get a first few episodes out, Chasing History Project, that you can all get through the website. The book can be purchased through the website, and the next one, when it comes out, can be too. I'm on Amazon. Most of my sales are on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon. I also am on the Ingram Spark Network, which means you can order my book through any regular bookstore. If you want to do that, they won't have it on the shelf. It's not that famous, but you can order it. But yeah, those would be the main things. ChasingHistoryProject.com, join the email list, follow the podcast, and you'll hear from me.
Ben, do an audiobook, please.
The podcast is the book.
Okay,
at the
perfect.
Moment. So I'm releasing the book one chapter at a time, and each chapter is one episode of the podcast. Okay. And I really enjoy that, actually. So I'm going to work my way through that. I ended up publishing them out of order. But when I get to the end, I'll be just producing more podcasts, but I'm kind of starting with the book.
What is the next book about?
The next book is the one about the chop. So it's almost like a prequel. Like I said, they're very much the same headspace when I was writing both of them.
Yeah, dude, if it's anything like the Sorry Guys, We Stormed the Capitol, like I'm stoked. It's going to be a great read, man, for sure.
Well, thank you.
Well, dude, thanks for coming on. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.